Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. What we're going to look at now is the gastrointestinal tract. To understand how the gastrointestinal tract works, you automatically have the knowledge on how to treat it. Because as children, we're taught that when we get sick, we go to the doctor. Is that right? And a lot of people are getting frustrated with that because the drugs aren't healing, because the fact is drugs never heal. They might play a part in a crisis, but they don't heal disease. So a lot of people are getting frustrated with what's happening there, and so now people are going to the naturopath. But the fact is there is no wonder cure. If there is a wonder cure, it's called the human body, when it's given the right conditions. So that is our aim here, is to teach you those conditions so that when you leave here, when a problem arises, and how many people have stopped going to doctor and start to go to Dr. Google, and there on Dr. Google is just so confusing. This person says this person says eat all day long, this person says no, only eat twice a day. So rather than be confused and wonder, well, what is the right way, I'm going to show you how your gastrointestinal tract works. And when you understand how it works, and when you understand what happens at different stages, you automatically have the knowledge on how to treat it. And remember the other thing that we're reviving, it's called listening. And when I was in the Sacred Valley in Peru in March, way up in the foothills of the Andes, what an experience. At the retreat I was at, speaking on health, a lady stood up and she said, I grew up in Peru, and she said, and my family really pushed me to get educated, to go to university. I got a master's in business. She said, I went and lived in New York and I was living the high flyer life, but I was getting sicker and sicker. And she said, I got to the point where I could hardly function. The late nights, the living on coffee and alcohol, the bad food, it takes its toll. Even though this woman, was in her, I think she lived like that for about 5 years, in her late 20s, early 30s. So she came back to Peru and she just wanted to be fixed. And her parents took her to a local natural healer, and then he asked her, tell me about your lifestyle, and she told him, and he said, and so when you eat a meal like that, how do you feel? She said, I don't know. How many people would say that? I don't know. I don't know how I feel. So this living in the city with this high flyer life, she'd lost all ability to even read her body. And just that one question stumped her. She said, I'm highly educated in so many areas, and yet I couldn't tell this man how I felt when I ate food like that. She said, I was really humbled, and I started to realise I have knowledge in many areas, but I'm totally ignorant as to this body. And so what's the use of all of that knowledge if you don't even know how to look after your body? So when I sat in casualty or emergency for 6 hours with my broken arm, I knew it was serious because the pain was through the roof, and yes, the bone was sticking out like that. I knew I needed a bit more than a poultice for this one. And I'm so glad God doesn't tell you the future. And I didn't know I was going to sit there for 6 hours. You know why I sat there for 6 hours? Because the whole system is chopped up. And I'm sitting there listening. Nurse says to the person, yes, what's the matter? Oh, my heart's racing. Next one. My blood pressure's gone up. My finger's sore. My little girl's got a sore elbow. My little boy's got gastric. He's running around the place. He didn't look too sick to me. And The whole system is chocked up, and I'm sitting there and I'm confronted with two facts. Number one is no one knows how to look after their bodies anymore. Going to emergency because some gravy fell on the hand? We don't even know how to fix a burn. And so my husband went and said, my wife is in serious pain. They said, she's on the fast track. I'd hate to be on the slow track. And the other thing that I was confronted with was, now I know why I do what I do. I've got to get this hand fixed out and I've got to go back to work on teaching people how to look after their bodies. And so let's go on a journey through our gastrointestinal tract. I also now know why there were 4 doctors that used to get me to go to their town to teach this. Because they know if the average person knew this, it would cut down emergency. So that the only ones that go to emergencies are really true emergencies. So we're going to start with the mouth. And the mouth is the only place in the gastrointestinal tract what we have say over. We don't have say over anywhere else. And by the way, the gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube. So it's considered an external part of the body. Anything that goes into your gastrointestinal tract is not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny little substances, then absorbed into the blood. Then it becomes part of you or me. And that's why a mother said to me, my little boy's got a cold and he keeps snorting and swallowing, and it's all going inside of him. I said, oh, actually it's not. It's just going into his hollow tube and it's going to come out the other end. And then I had a mother who was totally distraught and distressed. She said, I'm so embarrassed to tell you this, but my baby was on the grass and she ate some dog droppings. I said, it's all right, it's just going to go in one end, come out the other. And by the way, if a baby will eat that, how come in a year they're fussy? Do you ever ask yourself that? What makes a child fussy? Well, I can tell you now, if you give a child a chocolate, they'll never eat that bowl of salad. Yeah, sorry, it's us. We're the ones that dictate the taste. So what are the 5 things we have say over? We have say over what goes in. Is it fast food? Devitalised food, which is one of the reasons this young woman was sick? Or is it organic, healthy food, prepared in the best manner? We have say over what goes in. We have say over how much goes in. Is it 5 platefuls of food or is it 1 plateful of food? We have say over how long it stays in the mouth. Got that? Choo-choo, swallow, choo-choo, swallow, choo-choo, swallow. My husband does everything fast. Drives fast, but it's all right, I love it, I love speed. We're on the Autobahn and he's driving 170 k's an hour and he's got his phone there trying to take photos to send back to all the boys. Yes, we got up to 250. Anyway, I'm talking about Michael and speed. Guess what else Michael does with great speed? Eats. And I'm often just touching his hand and looking at him and smiling, and he goes, oh, put it. Just needs gentle reminders. There's no teeth in the stomach. So the only teeth we've got is in the mouth. So please, at the next meal, chew, chew, chew. Now, one of the reasons why it's so important to chew is that when we chew, right down to almost a cream, that's what it should be. Have you heard the old saying, we should drink our food and chew our drinks? So when our guests do the juicing, and this afternoon when we look at the liver, I'm going to take you through the juicing program that our guests do at Misty Mountain. we get them to take a mouthful of the juice and swish it in their mouth and then swallow it. Another mouthful of juice, swish it in their mouth and then swallow. It warms the juice. It also, a few little enzymes in the mouth start to break it down. And we should drink our food. So ideally try and go for about 30 chews. And what that does too is that tells the brain, there's a bit of fat, there's a little bit of protein, there are some carbohydrates. And then it can message the organs further down. There's a bit of protein coming, there's a bit of, and these organs are ready. But if someone goes chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, the organs are saying, what's coming? And the brain says, I don't know. They're just, we can't actually assess that. And also, when you chew your food, you break it down to tiny little particles. And what that does, that allows a greater surface area for the enzymes to work on. So it's very important to chew, chew, chew. The next one is we say how often it goes in. Is it every 2 hours or is it just at meal times? And as we get into the stomach, you'll see that we need to leave breaks between meals. And the fifth one is we have say over environment of entry. The environment that we're eating in, no controversial issues discussed at the meal table. Because whenever you get upset or stressed, it just blocks the release of your digestive enzymes. So they're the ones we have say over. My book, Self-Heal by Design, I've got a chapter in there called The Stomach's Secret Weapon, Hydrochloric Acid, but I have those listed in that and also Sustain Me. So if you didn't quite catch them, they're written in the books. So the mouth. Many people don't realise that digestion begins in the mouth. Picked up the wrong one. And it's an alkaline environment. And one enzyme is lingual lipase. Underneath the tongue, there's a sublingual gland. And the sublingual gland releases lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is the enzyme that breaks down saturated fat. That's the only fat that it breaks down, is saturated fat. So saturated fat is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. So what's saturated fat? A butter is a saturated fat. Coconut oil is a saturated fat. I was in Kuala Lumpur about 2 months ago. And when I flew into Kuala Lumpur, all you can see is palm trees making the palm oil. It's their biggest industry. And as I lectured, I talked about the palm oil being quite a good oil. And they were challenged. They said, we've been told it's a bad oil. Well, with the palm oil, it's an ethical issue because they're chopping down all the rainforests to grow palm trees so that they can make a lot of palm oil, because if you make chocolate with coconut oil, all you can taste is coconut. So they like the palm oil to make chocolates. And you'll see sometimes if you buy a chocolate, it's got there, it's a ethical chocolate because it's made with oil that is grown not in the forests or, in the areas where the forests were cut down in. And you'll see that sometimes. But nutritionally, the palm oil is really no different on the body to the coconut oil. Shea butter, there are some healthy vegan desserts or chocolates that you can make using shea butter. So they're all saturated fats. Macadamia, that has some saturated fat in it. So that the saturated fats breakdown begins in the mouth. The other food that's broken down or starts to break down in the mouth is starch. And in the mouth, there's a salivary amylase that's released called ptyalin. And ptyalin begins the starch breakdown. And that's why when you're eating breads or pastas or rice, please chew very, very well, because the breakdown begins in the mouth. When we get down to the stomach, you will see that the stomach is an acid environment. And so when your ptyalin and your starch are mixed together, When they go into the stomach, that's actually put on hold. But as you'll see when we get further down, it starts again a little bit later. It starts again a little bit later, but if it hasn't had its beginning breakdown in the mouth, that makes it harder further down. Another reason why chew very, very well. If you're eating rice and you do 2 chew swallow, I can tell you right now that 80% of that rice has not been chewed. You've got to chew it very well. In a baby, there is very little ptyalin in the mouth. The first teeth that we get is 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom, and they're called milk teeth. And the reason why they're called milk teeth is because that's what should be baby's main food, milk. It's also taste time, and babies shouldn't be given any food till they can sit, they can feed themselves, and they've got a couple of teeth. But it's just taste time. What do you give them for their first food? Piece of cucumber, piece of celery stick, piece of apple, and they learn to chew. Another reason why a lot of people go chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow is because their first food as baby was slop. Got that? Just slop. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. And I was reading some accounts of dentists. In fact, I've quoted one Scottish dentist in my book, Sustain Me. He claims that a lot of gum and teeth and jaw development problems are happening because people don't eat enough crunchy food. It's like if the little 2-year-old, they're hungry and breakfast not quite ready, give them an apple. Don't peel it, don't core it, give them an apple. Because guess what? They'll work it out. They'll work it out, and they feel so proud of themselves that they worked it out. We've got to stop spoon feeding them. Actually, I never ever spoon fed my babies. Never. But I didn't give them food until all their teeth were through. I just give them little bits. Just little bits. So the next teeth that come through after those 8 are the molars. And when the molars come through, then ptyalin is released that breaks down starch. Because what do your molars do? Grind. What do we do with starch? We grind it. We grind grain. Now you have my permission that when you buy the book Sustain Me, take a photo of the baby feeding section and give it to every mother you know. Because one of the reasons people have gut problems today is because they were fed starch too soon as baby. They were fed, doesn't sound very nice, slop, but I don't know what else to call it. And so we can prevent many problems later on by feeding the babies this. But what happens is, and we should never make a decision on fear. In Psalm 146 verse 3, the Bible says, put not your trust in princes. Got that? Who are the princes? The authorities in the field. Yeah? Doesn't mean you don't go to them. You might go and get some advice. But what do you do with advice? You can take it or leave it. Because the princes in the field of nutrition, of pediatrics, they're telling mothers today, breast milk doesn't have enough iron in it in the second 6 months of life. So you've got to start giving the baby cereal at 4 to 6 months of age. Cereal, they don't even start to get their first teeth till they're about 7 months old. They don't get the molars till they're 14, maybe 22 months of age. And the princes, the authorities in the field, are telling mothers, you must give your baby cereal, you must give them iron, otherwise their brains and their bodies won't develop properly. So why do they do it? Out of fear. They don't want to hurt their babies. Okay, let's go back. Let's go back a couple of 100 years ago. Did you know a few 100 years ago and before, babies often didn't eat food till they were 2 or 3 years of age? Did they suffer? Do you know what that means? Mozart, Galileo, Einstein, Rembrandt, weren't fed food till they were 2 or 3. Has the breast milk changed? No, it's exactly the same. Has God made a mistake? God does not make mistakes. His ways are perfect. Breast milk is perfect. You look at the growth of a baby in the first 6 months of life, and you look at the growth of the baby in the second 6 months of life, there's a big difference. The first 6 months they grow incredibly fast. The second 6 months they're still growing but not as fast. They don't need as much iron. God gave parents the authority over what their children have. And I have mothers saying, I'm getting so much pressure because I'm not feeding my baby food. I said, this is the best thing to say. Is your baby eating food? Oh, yes. I'm very happy with my baby. My baby's developing so well. Change the subject. Yes, the food is your breast milk. Because there are very so-called well-meaning adults, parents, other mothers that come in. And so many young mothers that they submit because of fear. So my son James, he's the one I said that's built like a bodybuilder. He was not interested in food till he was 16 months of age. Well, he doesn't seem to have suffered. He's a master builder. He's an incredible musician. He's incredibly fit, and he's an artist. Didn't seem to have suffered. My daughter Emma, she had twin girls. They're 19 now. She did not give them any food till they were 18 months of age. Well, I haven't suffered. And in my book, Sustain Me, I cover all of that. So they're the only two that start their breakdown in the mouth. And then we come down into the stomach. And there's a little valve here called the cardiac sphincter. It's a double-layered valve. And that little cardiac sphincter, it sits in our diaphragm. And it's a muscle. And some people are suffering from things like GERDs, reflux, heartburn. You've heard of those problems. What is that? That's the acid coming from the stomach up into the esophagus. We even had a guest whose esophagus was ulcerated. And so what's blamed as the problem? Acid. Well, if you stop the acid in the stomach, what's going to break the protein down now? The problem is not the acid. It's the gate. To give antacids to someone with heartburn or reflux is like shooting the cows because they keep getting in the veggie garden. Just shut the gate. All we need to do is shut the gate. How do you shut the gate? Well, it's a muscle. And when that muscle tightens, it opens. When you swallow, a little valve closes off your trachea, opens your esophagus, and the esophagus starts moving the food down, tightening it, and so then that little muscle tightens and opens, and the food goes into the stomach. Amazing processes that we don't even think about. So that little muscle, the cardiac sphincter, it sits in the middle of your diaphragm. You know your diaphragm is a muscle that goes like that? So if your core muscles are not strong, if they have no tone, then that's going to cause that little muscle to have no tone. So if you go to the doctor with heartburn, will he talk to you about strengthening your core muscles? No, won't even mention it. So everyone should have strong core muscles. Our massage therapist says we can tell the strength of the body by the strength of the core. Do you do your push-ups every day? Pardon? Ladies, you can do ladies push-ups, and if you can't even get down on the floor, you can do push-ups on the wall, you can do push-ups on the bench, you can do, but start to strengthen that core. And that will help to strengthen that little muscle. Also, because it's a muscle, and when it's relaxed, it's closed, magnesium will close it. And many people have this problem because they're eating breakfast like a pauper, lunch like a pauper, and the tea is the king, or the supper you call it, is the king and the queen together. So when they lie down to go to sleep, gravity causes that lump in the stomach to push against that cardiac sphincter. It's not the odd time you have dinner with friends. And it's not the odd time you don't have an evening meal, it's what you do every day that has the effect. So ideally we should be having most of our food at breakfast and at lunch, and if you eat at night it should be something light, like soup, smoothie, crackers and hummus, maybe a bit of fruit. But what you do is you see what works for you. What about the time-restricted eating? Well, for the time-restricted eating, a lot of couples, they tell me, especially retired ones, they eat a meal at 9 and eat a meal at 3. But to be able to implement our teaching program, we had to give an earlier breakfast and an earlier lunch, and so we serve a very light tea. So you do what works. So the stomach should be acid. And if someone says to me, I've got a very acid stomach, I said, fantastic, you must be digesting your food really well. Because did you know that dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid of humans? And dogs don't get heartburn or reflux or stomach ulcers. It's not the acid. And when you wake up in the morning, the acid is not strong. It's only released when we smell, see, think food. And I'm sure when we all went into the kitchen this morning or the dining room and saw the food and smelt the food, it started to be released. So the best time to drink water is early in the morning, because this bottom valve, which is called the pyloric sphincter, is open and the water goes straight down. Lining the stomach, and the stomach is lined with big folds. And these big folds are lined with glands. And 2/3 of these glands release mucus. So that's a thick mucosal wall lining the stomach. And mucus is 99% water. One of the first things that's thickened when you drink a glass of water half an hour before the meal is that mucosal lining. So there are those glands, and down here there's a few other things released. One is hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid, if a drop goes on your skin, it would burn a hole in your skin. It's very strong. And hydrochloric acid needs, when your stomach needs this thick mucosal wall to protect it. What's also released is pepsinogen. And pepsinogen unites with hydrochloric acid to release pepsin. And pepsin is the protein breaker. So God in his wisdom and mercy didn't arrange for that connection to happen here, or it would start breaking down the lining of your stomach. It actually happens in the stomach, and it will only happen successfully, this union, in a very acid stomach, and pepsin only works in an acid stomach. Something else is released from here, and that's the intrinsic factor. And the intrinsic factor is necessary for the absorption of vitamin B12. Did you know that vitamin B12 is an airborne bacteria? And it's quite possible we're getting some when we drink this beautiful water from here. When you pick an apple off a tree, you're getting a little. When you pick a strawberry off the strawberry plant and eat it. When you're picking parsley, chopping it up and putting it on, you're getting a little bit. B12 is also found in organically grown, root-grown vegetables. Meat eaters and vegetarians can all suffer from low B12, and it's usually a lack of the intrinsic factor. So let me show you how B12 is processed in the body. In the gastrointestinal tract, when you eat food that has B12 on it, it's connected to a R protein, and hydrochloric acid is required to release the R protein from the B12. And so in the stomach we've got our B12 released and we've got the intrinsic factor released, and they both float together down the small intestine until the last part of the small intestine, the intrinsic factor and the B12 connect, and then they're absorbed into what's called the enterohepatic circulation. Hepatic meaning liver. And this circulatory system it circulates in it, and it keeps circulating until you need the B12. So most people with B12 deficiency, it's because they're lacking the intrinsic factor. Why would they lack the intrinsic factor? Well, when people are eating all day long, they exhaust these enzymes. When people are drinking with their meals, they wash them away. When people are stressed with their meals, it stops the release of these enzymes. So if someone has continual low B12, we target the stomach. We target the stomach to find out, well, why? Because it's constantly being circulated, a person can have no B12 in their diet for 30 years and not show a deficiency. It's all about, again, the hydrochloric acid to release the R protein and the intrinsic factor to connect with the B12, which is absorbed way down in the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestine. It was probably about 15 years ago now, I bought a book, and I'd heard about this book. I'd heard of references to the book. It was written in 1833, and I found out the name of the book, and I found out the name of the author. It's Observations on the Physiology of Digestion by Dr. William Beaumont, and Amazon found it for me. It cost me 20 cents, but it cost me $20 by the time I got it, because it's the most fascinating story, and I'd heard references to it. So it must have been in the very early 1800s. Dr. William Beaumont was only 25 at the time, and he was called to an accident in a trading store. A young man named Alexis St. Martin had sustained a gunshot wound to the stomach. It was an accident. So this gunshot wound had blasted his stomach and his ribs, and Dr. Beaumont attended the young man, and he said he would not live, but they took him to hospital and patched him up the best they could. Twice a big tumour arose, burst, pus came out, and a 2-inch piece of rib. What an incredible body we've got. Just imagine if they'd given him antibiotics, it would have settled the tumour down, but where would the piece of rib stayed? See, that's why it's important to listen, watch and follow the body. Anyway, eventually he actually healed, but he healed with a hole in his stomach, and the hole was about here. Dr. Beaumont could have stitched it, but Alexis St. Martin said, no, I don't want you to do anything else to me. It had like a little flap of skin over it. But Dr. Beaumont saw his opportunity. He started doing experiments. He would get a piece of silk thread, put a bit of food on it, and put it in the hole. Take it out after an hour, look at it, put it back in, pull it out again. And he did extensive experiments on Alexis St. Martin. I think he had him at his house. He got him to just do, chop wood and do things around the house. And he meticulously documented his findings. So this book that I got, the first third of the book is the story, and the last 2/3 of the book are his meticulously documented experiments. I'm used to reading the King James Version of the Bible, and it's written in Old English, so it's not hard for me to understand it. But what he found was, and by the way, Alexis St. Martin ended up leaving, marrying, having a heap of children, and then Dr. Beaumont would contact him and say, look, do you mind coming back? I'll put your children through school, I'll put you in a nice house, I'll do a few more experiments on the whole. He lived till he was about 85. Dr. Beaumont said he thinks he would have lived longer if he hadn't drank so much alcohol. It's a fascinating story. What Dr. Beaumont found, that there were 5 things that caused the food to stay in the stomach 8 hours later. Not all the food, but portions of the food. So let's have a look at what those 5 things are. If Alexis St. Martin overate, Dr. Beaumont came to the conclusion that there's only so much there's only so much gastric enzymes released, and if it's just overloaded, it takes the stomach a long time to break it down. Let's consider the evening of the 25th of December. Most people aren't interested in eating, are they? Because lunch was bigger, grander, richer than usual. So if he ate, it's not all the food, but there were still remnants of the meal in the stomach 8 hours later if he overate. If he often ate, it was a very refreshing for me to see that in the last 10 years that nutritionists are saying time-restricted eating. Give a 6-hour break between meals. Because the fact is that, and Dr. Beaumont proved this, and many experiments since have proved it, digestion takes 3.5 to 4 hours. And then the stomach loves a rest of approximately 1 hour to replace all the digestive enzymes. So what does that equal? That leaves a 5 to 6 hour break between meals. They're proving that now to be the most effective way, because if you often ate, or you're putting food in every couple of hours, you interrupt the digestion of the previous food. It's like this. My husband said to me one day, he said, I had a 5-hour job to do today. He said, it's 8 hours later and I'm only 1 hour into it. So why was that? Phone kept ringing. He said every 20 minutes someone's knocking on the door. He keeps getting interrupted. That's exactly what happens to the stomach. In fact, let me show you. So let's say we've got breakfast here, and after probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours, some of the food's broken down quicker than others, which would be your simple fruits. So they're starting to go through. Pyloric sphincter opens and they start to go through. And then it's mid-morning and the person has a croissant and a cup of coffee, or a pie and a cup of tea, or maybe they're really healthy and it's an apple and a handful of nuts. Whatever it is, pyloric sphincter says, quick, shut the gate, something's just come in and it's not broken down. And that pyloric sphincter will stay shut until this is broken down to the right state, joins this, now it'll open. And so a little bit more goes through. Every time, yes, a little bit more. So maybe we're up to this and it's lunchtime. Oh no! Shut the gate, quick, something else is just coming. Can you see why remnants of breakfast can be still in the stomach at the end of the day when a person's eating every couple of hours? And they did experiments on this with Loma Linda University's nurses, and they got them to eat a meal, 5 hours later another meal. Just before the meal they tested the stomach, totally empty. Just before they had a light supper, totally empty. Next day they gave them snacks and they found the same thing. At the end of the day there was still remnants of some breakfast still in the stomach. I remember when I was a little girl, if we were hungry in the afternoon, Mum would say, wait for tea. But what are kids told now? They're just given, and then the parents wonder why they don't eat their, we call it supper. And you've probably noticed that when children say they're starving or they're hungry, they're usually bored or they're thirsty. Do you know the stomach often doesn't know the difference between thirst and hunger? So that hunger pang you get mid-morning, it's usually thirst. Also, large fluid with the meal. Obviously, a mouthful's not going to make a big difference, but large amounts of fluid with the meal. And what Dr. Beaumont found, because he's sort of hands-on, he's looking at it, watching it, seeing it. And he said what he discovered is that yes, it waters down the digestive juices, and the stomach knows it, so it stops digestion, and then it has to get rid of all of that water and bring the acidity back to be able to break the food down. You will find that if you sit to your meal well hydrated, you won't need to drink with your meal, because it's such a habit. Isn't that true? It's an Australian habit, it's an American habit, and no matter what country I go to, what's the first thing the waiter asks you when you sit in a restaurant? What will you drink? Do you know, we let them put water there, otherwise they won't leave us alone. They almost think we're being neglected if we don't have drinks with the meal. Also, alcohol. Whenever he had alcohol with the meal, it slowed down digestion. And whenever he had alcohol the next day, he would get irritated at simple things. Stress. Stress just blocks the release of the digestive enzymes. And how many people are going through that? Every day, all day. And how many people have digestive problems? So to heal the digestive problems, make sure you're well hydrated when you sit to eat. Have most of your food breakfast and lunch. If you're thirsty, by all means have a mouthful and put the stress aside. What does that mean? Put the phone aside. How can you boost hydrochloric acid? Because I've never met anyone with too much hydrochloric acid. How can you boost hydrochloric acid? The juice of a lemon just before the meal. Third of a cup of hot ginger tea. It's called a sweet bitter, just before the meal. Third of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper in a little water, just before the meal. They will all help to boost hydrochloric acid and leave breaks between the meal. So in the stomach, in this acid environment, it is pepsin that breaks down the protein. My son James, he's on the job site with all of his mates. They're all builders and carpenters. He takes this bitter tea mix to work with him, and all the guys have a mouthful before they have lunch because they want to increase the breakdown of their protein so they get stronger muscles. And in my book, in both my books, I've got a tea recipe there. It's called Digestive Tea, and it has bitter herbs in it. So now we come out of the stomach, we come out through the pyloric sphincter. Dr. Beaumont came to the conclusion that the pyloric sphincter gives off sensors, and that's how it knows if the food's broken down to the right state, because it won't open until it's at the right state. But we come down into the duodenum, and the duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. And the duodenum is an alkaline environment. And to make sure that it is alkaline, the pancreas releases sodium bicarbonate. And that sodium bicarbonate neutralizes the acidity coming out of the stomach. The only part of our body that should be acid is stomach. So there's quite a bit happening here. This is peak hour, is in the first part of the small intestine. So you'll notice what we've got here is the liver, and underneath the liver there's like a little pouch called the gallbladder. The liver makes bile, and the gallbladder is just a reservoir for the bile. That's why if you've had your gallbladder removed, I'm so sorry to hear that. I don't believe in cutting body parts out. Your liver still makes bile. And what food should you eat? Your body will tell you. And sometimes your body will say, don't do that again. And you know what you say? Okay. And sometimes it'll go, that was good. And sometimes if it goes like that, it's actually because the food wasn't actually, it's not sitting well, it's more that maybe it was too close to the last meal. Part of being your own doctor is documenting your case. It's important to document your case, and if your gut's not working well, it's a good idea to make a diary and write down what you ate and write down out of 10. 10 out of 10 is, oh, happy stomach. 1 out of 10 is, oh, groaning. And then as soon as that happens, you look, what was the last meal? What was the last meal? Because there was something there that it didn't like. It is that simple. And this will tell you more than any test that you can have with the doctor. So in the duodenum, we've got the liver releasing bile via the gallbladder. And bile is the enzyme that starts the breakdown of your poly and your mono unsaturated fats. Remember, the saturated fats, their breakdown began in the mouth, but the polyunsaturated, all your unsaturated fats, they're broken down by bile from the liver. The pancreas, it releases an enzyme called pancreatic lipase, and pancreatic lipase finalizes the breakdown of the unsaturated fats. The bile emulsifies it into tiny particles, then the pancreatic lipase further breaks it down. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now remember, in the mouth, salivary amylase, ptyalin, started starch digestion, and the pancreatic amylase, it finalizes the starch digestion. So starch digestion begins in the mouth under the action of the salivary amylase ptyalin. That's why it's important to chew your starchy foods, your carbohydrates. And then when it gets into the stomach, that's put on hold because it's now an acid environment. And now when it comes into the duodenum under the action of pancreatic amylase, starch digestion is revived and finalized. The pancreas also releases two enzymes. We're going to call them the trypsin brothers. We'll just call them the trypsins. Two enzymes, trypsin and chymotrypsin. And the trypsin brothers, they finalize protein digestion. Protein digestion began in the stomach under the action of pepsin. Let me give you an illustration of this protein digestion. Here's protein. And in the stomach, under the action of pepsin, protein is broken down to peptides and polypeptides. And then the peptides and the polypeptides come into the small intestine, and the trypsin brothers break the peptide down to amino acid, the polypeptide down to an amino acid and peptide, and then the peptide down to amino acids. And it's only in these singular structures can they be absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. But let me show you what happens in many cases, unfortunately. The person's drinking with their meals, they're eating all day long, and they never eat anything much of substance, so they have their large meal at the end of the day, they're stressed out, and so not all the protein can get broken down. And so some undigested protein comes into the duodenum, and the trypsin brothers say, "What are you doing here?" And the protein says, "Sorry, but they're eating all day long, and they have their biggest meal at the end of the day, and they're stressed out, and they're drinking with their meals, and so our hydrochloric acid was slow, and pepsin couldn't work." And the trypsin brothers say, "We'll do the best we can," but they can only bring it down to a peptide and a polypeptide. So the peptide and the polypeptide can't be absorbed because only single structures can be absorbed. And so the peptide and the polypeptide get into the large intestine. And the large intestine says, "What are you doing here?" And they're saying, "Sorry, Trips and Brothers did the best they could, but they're eating all day long and they're drinking with their meals and they're stressed out." And the colon says, "Well, what are we going to do?" So what the colon does is it creates extra bacteria to try and break this down a bit, and that gives off methane gas. Everyone's heard of the methane gas. And that's why, remember back in the mouth, I said this is the only place we have say over. We have say over what goes in. We have say over how long it stays in the mouth. We have say over how much goes in. We have say over when it goes in. We have say over the environment of entry, because it affects it all the way down. So students, which organ is the main organ of digestion? It's the pancreas. And that explains why if someone's diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, sometimes they only live 5 weeks. They actually die of malnutrition. Because remember, our gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube, and anything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me till it gets out of the hollow tube and into the blood. And it can't get out of the hollow tube and into the blood unless it's broken down into those tiny substances. That's why digestion is so important. So a person can be eating the best organic food on the planet, prepared in the healthiest way, and yet not accessing the nutrients out of it. That's why if I get a phone call at lunchtime, I say, "I'm busy. I'm eating." I'll call them back, because it's a very important part of the day. And my cells, my bones, my hair, my eyes are all dependent on not only the type of food I'm eating, but how I'm digesting it. But God, in His wisdom and mercy, has put some enzymes in certain foods that can help with the breakdown of protein. A proteolytic enzyme is an enzyme that breaks down protein. So let's make a list of proteolytic enzymes. Pepsin is a proteolytic enzyme. The trypsin brothers, they're proteolytic enzymes. In the core of the pineapple is an enzyme called bromelain. And bromelain is a proteolytic enzyme. And isn't that the part of the pineapple most people throw away? Yes, it is tough, but if you slice the pineapple and then just cut it into sections, everyone will get a big slab of soft, sweet pineapple and a tiny little bit of the core. That's the best way to eat it. And also, we call it pawpaw, but I think you call it papaya. It contains papain. And papain is also a proteolytic enzyme. And you can buy digestive enzymes that have the bromelain and the papain in them. Now, I recently was told this, that you know when you make you have a pineapple, you cut the skin off. If you boil up the skin, so because it's a tough skin, you might boil it for 10 minutes and drink that, it has bromelain in it. The skin. That's cheap medicine, isn't it? So anyone that has pancreatic problems, pancreatic insufficiency, psoriasis of the pancreas, which basically is pancreatic cancer, they need immediately to go on some digestive enzymes. And ideally they will contain the bromelain and the papain. Digestion of our nutrients is usually totally completed halfway down the small intestine. Halfway down the small intestine, our nutrients are absorbed, and what's left is the insoluble fibre. And as you'll see, the insoluble fibre is very important. So now I'm going to take you to the grand finale of digestion, where everything's absorbed. Lining the small intestine are villi. And up the middle of the villi is a lacteal. And the unsaturated fats, they all get absorbed into the lacteal. In fact, the bile also releases micelles, and these micelles carry the unsaturated fats through to the lacteal. So now it's in the lymphatic system, then it's taken to the liver, and it's stored because those unsaturated fats are used predominantly for cell membrane function and repair, but not the saturated fat. When the saturated fat is broken down, and remember the breakdown begins in the mouth, it's absorbed straight into the blood. The saturated fat is a remarkable fat. And as you saw this morning, it's not fat that makes us fat. So there's blood all through these little villi. And coating the villi is a thick turf wall. This is made up of millions of little microorganisms. Millions. So we've got 100 trillion cells in the body, and there are 10 times that in microorganisms. And in the gastrointestinal tract, there's 10 times the microorganisms that you'll find in the body. And when we were in our mother's womb, our gut was sterile. That means no microorganisms. And I was watching a documentary on gut flora, and they were interviewing an obstetrician, and he was in his 70s. He said, we always thought God made a mistake putting the birth canal and the anus so close. Because when the baby's coming down and that birth canal stretches open and the anus stretches open, we don't want that baby to get anything out of that other hole. So he said, we always used to give a woman an enema when she came into hospital about to have a baby. But he said, we now know it's a perfect design. Because when that baby's skin hits the air and takes the first breath, what's the air they're breathing? The air coming out of the anus. Notice what the obstetrician said, it's a perfect design. Because the baby is now taking in the mother's microorganisms, and that's how the baby starts to populate their gastrointestinal tract with the microbes. And it takes 3 days before the milk comes through in the breast. For the first 3 days, the baby's drinking colostrum, which is a thick, yellow, creamy substance which is rich in microorganisms. That's why it's so important that a woman not take antibiotics in pregnancy, because what an antibiotic does is it drastically compromises her gut flora. And if she has compromised gut flora, she will give compromised gut flora to her baby. And they're finding that babies born via caesarean sections have more skin flora in their gut than gut flora. So if a baby's born via caesarean section, it's so important they be breastfed, but also the mother can paint a little probiotic powder on her nipple in the morning feed, and that gives a little boost to the baby's microorganisms. These microorganisms are responsible for the final breakdown of the food. Yes, all of these enzymes do major breakdown, but these microorganisms, they are responsible for the release of B vitamins. They've even shown today that they are causing a release of melatonin. That helps you sleep better. These microorganisms lining our gastrointestinal tract are essential not only to access everything we need out of our food, but also, as you'll see in another lecture, for the growth, development and maintenance of our immune system. These microorganisms are responsible for the absorption of our nutrients out of our gut and into the blood. They also protect. They protect the blood against any harmful pathogens that might be in the gut. They nourish. They nourish the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. So they're a very important part of, yes, finalising digestion, but for many reasons. So there are some things people are taking not realising that it's causing a compromise of their gut flora. Antibiotics do a very good job at killing off. One writer said taking an antibiotic into the gut is like dropping an atomic bomb. What did the atomic bomb do? Kill the good and the bad alike? Statin drugs. You will discover in another lecture how dangerous statin drugs are. They kill off gut flora. Long-term painkiller also kill off gut flora. And that gut flora, because it's gone, we now have a compromise in the final breakdown, a compromise in our immune system, a compromise in the absorption. Things are being absorbed because we've lost our protection. The cells that line the gut aren't getting nourishment. Ooh. Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut, and yet he didn't know the details of what I've shown you here. Let me show you something else. In another lecture we're going to be looking at what the hybridization of the wheat did to the protein or the gluten structure. It's created an incredibly complex structure and not easy for the gut to break down. And it breaks down to something called glutamorphine. Cows have about 5 stomachs, and those 5 stomachs break the milk into curds like yogurts and feta cheese. And if someone has been born into a family that's 5th generation dairy farmers, they may have the enzymes to break it down. I certainly do not. And so if I were to have milk, it can break down to caseomorphine. What's morphine? It's an opiate derivative. So let me show you what happens in the gut. So let's say this is gluto, there's the morphine, and this is caseomorphine. Let's say glutamorphine comes along. Here we've got a very happy cell because it's got some good gut flora there. And so glutamorphine comes along, and this happy cell knocks off the morphine, so only gluto or caseo gets in. But this cell here is very unhappy. It's got no gut flora to nourish it. So glutamorphine comes along and it doesn't have the ability to knock off the morphine. It doesn't have the ability to knock it off from glutamorphine or caseomorphine. So glutamorphine and caseomorphine get into the blood. They're taken up to the brain. The opiate receptor sites pick it up. And there's much research now showing the influence that wheat and dairy are having on mental illness. So to quote a few books, Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride in her book Gut and Psychology, she shows this link. Also Dr. David Perlmutter, he quotes a few psychiatrists who are taking their patients off refined foods, wheats, dairies, having a 50% improvement. And in his 2 books, Dr. Bruce Fife, one is called Stop Alzheimer's Now, the other one's called Stop Autism Now. He says you take you take these people off these refined foods, the wheats and the dairy, 50% improvement. So that's just not one author. This is coming from many different authors. Yeah. So can you see it's not just what they've done to the wheat. And what have they done to the milk? If you give a newborn baby calf the milk in the supermarket, that calf will die. So there's a huge difference between Lulabelle the cow, who's eating organic grass, raw milk, compared to the milk in the supermarket. But I have to tell you, I could not even have Lulabelle's milk. There's no, I've never been able to handle it. Dairy intolerance it's called. So it's obviously not in my heritage. But on the next breath, I've got a friend who's got an orphanage in Kenya. And all the babies that come in, they give them soy milk because they're plant-based. And all the babies are quite happy, but they got some Maasai babies. Maasai babies were not doing well. So her husband bought a cow, milked the cow, gave the cow's milk to the Maasai babies. Maasai babies recovered because the Maasai have been living on the cow's milk. And by the way, it's organic and raw. So knowing your heritage does have an effect on the foods that you can handle. So what can we do? What can we do to boost our gut flora? You've probably heard of probiotics. Probiotics are cultured foods. So cultured foods like miso, sauerkraut, yogurts. And if you're plant-based, you can get some very nice yogurts today. Cashew yogurts, coconut yogurts, almond yogurts. Kefir is another great probiotic food. But what feeds the probiotics is prebiotics. So there's a lot of talk now about prebiotics. So where do we get prebiotics? It's plant fibre. Plant fibre. Plant fibre feeds the microorganisms. So the red grape, and by the way, how many different types of red grapes are there? So all the different types of red grapes feed their own special microorganism. So you've got 10 different types of red grapes, they'll feed 10 different types of microorganisms. That's why we need a big variety of plants in our diets. More plants, more plants, more plants. And again, if your gut reacts to the lentils, start small. Start small and feed those microorganisms. And legumes have fantastic plant fibre. And also some lovely fibres are found in things like chia seed, making chia seed gel. And also slippery elm. When you put water with it, it goes a little slippery. And the aloe, they go one step further with healing the lining of the gut. And what that does is that repopulates. So we need both. We need the probiotics and the prebiotics. And there's much research now that shows that getting it via your food is superior. But you know, what the plant fibre does which is a prebiotic that feeds the probiotics, well, these microorganisms give off short-chain fatty acids, and those short-chain fatty acids, they are healing to the lining of the gut. You've heard of leaky gut? Well, that's what heals the leaky gut. So now we're left with insoluble fibre as it travels through the small intestine and into the large intestine. And there's a double-layered valve here, and that's called the ileocecal valve. It's a one-way valve. We don't want anything from here going back into there. And as I mentioned earlier, it's in that area where our B12 is absorbed. But notice there's a little organ here called the appendix. God doesn't make mistakes, does he? And the appendix has two important roles in the gut. One is it's called the colon's oil can, because it releases a substance that helps to lubricate the contents of the colon till it comes out, and it also releases antibacterial fluid, so that anything comes out of here, if it's a bit toxic, it calms it down until it gets out of the body. When vegetables, when plants break down, all plants, they ferment. When meat breaks down, it putrefies, and the putrefaction process is quite toxic. Now, dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid that we do, but they also have a gut that's only 1 yard long compared to our gut, which is 10 yards long. So with a dog, it's in and out quick. And as a gardener, we would never consider putting dogs' droppings into our compost bins or into our gardens, because it's actually got putrefied stuff in there. But if someone wants to eat meat and likes meat, my suggestion is make it a small part of the diet and pack it out with a lot of vegetables. But let's say someone's on a high meat diet and it must be organic. Personally, I choose to eat plants. So let's say we've got someone having a big steak for tea, and then they have a sugary dessert, ice cream, chocolate flavouring, and then they have, a few drinks of red wine. Wow, what's coming out here is pretty putrid. The sugars and the alcohols just add to the putrefaction, so that appendix is working hard. We've no idea what our body goes through, eh? Does such a good job. And if that continues and the appendix gets overworked, it can start to swell. There's your appendicitis. Notice this colon. It's got lots of grooves, lots of corners, and it needs to be swept every day. What sweeps it? Fibre. So fibre sweeps it. Fibre not only sweeps it, but fibre stimulates peristalsis as it goes through. Dr. Kellogg, very famous doctor who wrote many books on health in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he said 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations. Got that? He says if you eat 3 meals a day and you go once, you're constipated. And if you notice that our colon has a mind of its own, if you tell it to go, it won't. And if you tell it to stop because you're going too much, it won't. Now, the colon needs gentle stimulation. So the first point with the colon is to promptly answer nature's immediate call. Got that? Listen, if the body says go, we must go. We've got this lovely little muscle at the end of our colon called the puborectalis muscle. And the puborectalis muscle allows us to hold if we feel to go and we're in a traffic jam, if we feel to go and the planes are about to land. We're just so thankful to God that we can hold. But the problem is many people use that mechanism for, oh, I'm watching something, I don't want to go yet. Oh, I'm on the phone to a friend. Oh, I'm washing the car. Oh, I'm baking a cake. Oh, I'm in the middle of this and I don't want to stop. We had one guest, she said, I go. She said, people pay $300 an hour to speak to me, but if I'm on the phone, and she's advises on finance, and I feel to go, she said, I say, excuse me, a crisis has arisen, I'll ring you back. And what happens is, if someone feels to go and they don't go, and then half an hour later they sit, have you noticed that can't go? Because when that's full, we must go. And the body won't let it stay there, or it'll put too much pressure on the anus, and then you've got weakening the anal muscle, you've got hemorrhoids, and so what the body does is it takes it back into the last part. And one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed. So the next point is we must be well hydrated. In a hydrated body, the stools can remain soft. So it's very important to keep well hydrated. That's at least 8 glasses of water a day. Number 3, position. What do I mean by position? This is so important. I've got a little bit up here. I can put it here. I want everyone to see it. Here is the throne. And here is the person doing their daily evacuation on the throne. And when someone sits on the throne for their daily evacuation, puborectalis remains tight. Remember, it's a muscle. And things certainly do get through. But if the person sitting on the throne has a little stool before the throne, so that their knees are up in the air mimicking the squatting position, then puborectalis relaxes. And when puborectalis relaxes, too many pens in my hand here. When puborectalis relaxes, then the colon opens right up and the contents is able to be passed with much greater ease. What it also does is it takes all pressure off the anus. When pressure's put on the anus, for instance, if this person hasn't gone for a day and they decided to strain, all that happens is pressure goes on the anus. And when pressure goes on the anus, it can weaken the anus, and it can also cause those horrible little things to pop out called hemorrhoids, which are most distasteful. And when I worked in the operating theatre, we did a few hemorrhoidectomies. You know what they do? They just put a stitch around and cut it off. And I think, oh, how will that person feel when they wake up? Nothing compared to how they'll feel when they do their first bowel motion and they're not told about puborectalis and squatting. Takes all the pressure off that anus. One of the causes of hemorrhoids is constipation. So number 4 is fibre. More fibre, more fibre, more fibre. Fibre softens, especially that lovely fibre in your, like your chia seed gel. Chia seed gel is a great softener of stools. So to make chia seed gel, and you can make it with water, you can make it with coconut water, you can make it with fruit juice, you could make it with even a plant milk. It's 1/3 of chia seed to 3 cups of water. And you put it in a jar and you shake, shake, shake. In fact, I might talk to the staff and make some so you can taste it at breakfast tomorrow. Shake, 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 shake. And that's really nice poured over the fruit. Or you can put it in a smoothie. And if you Google chia seed desserts, you'll find some beautiful desserts that you can make with chia. Yeah? 1/3 of a cup. 1/3 of a cup of chia to 3 cups of fluid. So we'll just say fluid. You make it with water, it's tasteless. I don't mind because you just pour that on, say your fruit salad. It's nice. But for people who are struggling to go, taking a half a cup of that every meal, that can certainly produce bowel movements. Exercise is also very important because when you exercise, you increase the circulation of the blood to the colon, and when you exercise, you also do a nice gentle massage on the colon. That's why your core strengthening exercises, so your Pilates type exercises that strengthen the core, does a lovely massage to the area. But what if it's the other, and that is irritable bowel? There are 5 common allergen foods that are like kerosene to a fire on the colon. One is dairy, the other is wheat. See, in a compromised gut, it really struggles to break these down. Oats are high in lectins, which can increase inflammation. Peanuts are commonly contaminated with mold. And refined sugar, it's just like kerosene on a fire. Any inflammation in the body, the refined sugar just feeds it. So those foods must be stopped. And this is the same not only for irritable bowel, but also for Crohn's disease, colitis, ulcerative colitis. And there is a herb called slippery elm. And slippery elm is the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree, and you live in the country where the slippery elm grows. So it's not hard for Americans to get slippery elm. And all you do is put a teaspoon in a cup, maybe half a cup of hot water, mix it very well and drink it. It'll go a little thick. If it goes too thick, put a little bit more hot water in it. And it coats, soothes and heals the lining of the gut. Slippery elm contains a growth stimulant. So let me tell you the story of a lady that heard this on Tuesday night. I was in New Zealand. She said, I've had irritable bowel for 30 years. She said, no one ever told me that this foods can have an irritating effect on the colon. She said, I basically, that's my main food. She's a vegetarian. So she made a decision to stop. And she bought the slippery elm. She started taking it 4 times a day before every meal and before she went to bed at night. Tuesday night she heard this. Thursday night she came up to me and she said, Barbara, I have to tell you, I'm not bleeding from the colon. I have to tell you, I don't have any cramping. And she's been on medication for years. 2 days in a dietary change, taking this herb slippery elm, and she's seen more results in 48 hours than 30 years. Teaspoon of slippery elm in about half a cup of hot water. Necessity is the mother of invention. As you do it, you'll work it out. Mix it quickly or it'll go lumpy. My son Peter liked the lumps. Not everyone likes the lumps. Now that lady's not healed, but what's her body just said to her? Yes, and we've seen that happen many times. We had one guy come to Misty Mountain. In fact, he came with his wife. I said, what's your reason for coming? He said, I'm here to support my wife. I said, do you want any medication? He said, yes, I'm on anti-inflammatories and I'm on cortisone every day for Crohn's disease. He said, my doctor's just told me he can do no more for me. Actually, you know what the next step is? Cut the colon out, or cut part of the colon out. Remember, it's operate, medicate or irradiate. You've just got to remember that's all they've got. And so I said, do you mind if I try something? He said, oh, no, you can try it. See, he was not interested to be at our health retreat. Anyway, so we don't serve any of these foods at our retreat. We gave him slippery elm 4 times a day. He was on juices for the first 2 days, and I wondered how that'd go, but he was getting more nutrients out of those juices than usual, so his energy levels came up. This guy is mid-60s. I saw him on Wednesday. I said, how's it going? He said, it's incredible. He said, I've stopped bleeding and I'm not having cramps anymore. He said, I'm astonished. He said, also, my stools have got a little bit of form to them. So he's got bleeding and cramping and diarrhea on all the doctor's medications. I said, well, I can't tell you what to do about your medication, but I can tell you what I do. I said, only you and your doctor have authority over your medication. Got that? Someone said to me, Barbara, but I'm not medically trained. I said, that's a great advantage. Got that? Keep it simple. I said, I have no authority, but I said, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd stop your anti-inflammatories. So he did. Now, if the bleeding had come back and if the cramping, you've got a choice. Go back on the anti-inflammatories or take this every 2 hours. Some people say, is it safe? Does anyone ever ask the doctor if those cortisone is safe? Is those anti-inflammatory? It's very safe. It's just a plant. But there was no reaction. He said to me, do you know that I live near the coast and I go on a half-hour walk every day, and I know exactly where the toilets are because I go 4 times on my morning walk. Last day he came running up to me, he said, I've just done a half-hour walk and I haven't gone. He was so happy. Remember why he came to our retreat? Just to support his wife. And he found healing at our retreat. He said, I eat all of that. And he said, I have a couple of Jack Daniels every night. Do I have to tell him what to eat? No. No, it's his decision. If he said to me, this is interesting, but I like the food, you know what I say? Okay. It's his choice. It's our God-given right to do what we do to our body, but I very much doubt if he was going to go back to that. And what we showed him was how delicious the food can be. There's so many things that you can do with plants. Huge amounts you can do with plants. God gave us taste buds for a reason. It should taste good, but it also should be such that it is healing to our body. And when I looked at his diet, there was hardly any fibre. Hardly any fibre at all. He basically was on a refined wheat, had a lot of dairy, a lot of cheese, a lot of meat. Didn't have the oats, really liked peanut butter, had a lot of sugar in everything. Just changing those foods and going on the slippery elm. Now as his body heals, he can take less and less of the slippery elm. He said, what should I do with the cortisone? I said, you've got to come off that very slowly. So if you're on 10 milligrams a day, ask the doctor if you can have some 5 milligram tablets. And maybe might even take a month, you know, now on 5 milligrams, and then ask the doctor if you can go to 2.5, and then just very, very, very slowly, because the body basically, it's addicted to it. It's like drug addicts, you can't just stop them, you've got to go real slow, because the body's become addicted to it. So what we want is our body to become addicted to the good food. To the good food. And what you'll find, and many people have testified to this, the taste change. Things that they thought they'd never like, they start to love, and things they thought they could never do without, they actually don't have a desire for them anymore. And so this man went back to his doctor, and his doctor was shocked. And I think it's our responsibility to show the doctor that, hey, I live in a body that works, and I'll make some adjustments. It's working. So time is up, time for a break.